Every October, I'm always looking for new horror games to play with friends. Sure, there's lots of online horror games, but that's not what we're about here. I'm talking about local co-op horror games that you can play with your friends and yell at the screen together on the same couch. And here's 10 of them that are pretty good and I think should get a little bit more attention. Before I get into the main list, I wanted to briefly mention a game called Seven Mansions that came out on the Sega Dreamcast. This game came out exclusively in Japan, so if you're like me, you definitely missed this one back in the day. A few years ago, a fan translation came out, so it's much easier for English-speaking audiences to give it a try. I'm not going to get into this game too much, because I just did a full deep dive about the history of the game and its gameplay, and how it's the first co-op survival horror game ever made. So definitely give that video a watch if you're interested in that sort of thing. Outer Terror is basically a horror-themed take on Vampire Survivors. It mixes those automatic attacks and endless hordes with a darker tone, and it has a 2.5D camera. But unlike Vampire Survivors, there is a little bit of control with the right stick. You can move a cursor around and kind of aim your attacks. There are 5 standalone stories, and they're each told through a comic book style intro. There's aliens, cults, haunted valleys, all sorts of horror, and it's got a pretty cool vibe overall, even if the writing's a little rough. Gameplay wise, it follows the usual loop. You level up, pick upgrades, and you attack all of the endless hordes of monsters. But unlike Vampire Survivors, this one's not just about surviving all of the enemies. Each level has its own story-based objectives, but I did find some of the goals to be kind of confusing and I couldn't really figure it out. This game does have 2-player local co-op, which is obviously why we're talking about it, but unfortunately, you start with half health and there's no way to revive each other. So that part does kind of suck, but I'm glad that it exists. Overall, it's not one of the best horror games, but if you do like Vampire Survivors, you're definitely going to like this one too. It's simple but fun. And if you're like me, this one just flew under your radar. I didn't know about it until doing research for this video. Darkwatch is a horror-themed first-person shooter that came out on the original Xbox and the PS2 in the early 2000s. But what sets the PlayStation 2 version apart is that you can play through the entire story mode in split-screen co-op. You play as Jericho Cross, an outlaw who accidentally gets bitten during a train heist and ends up working for a secret vampire hunting organization. This game has a morality system that lets you go good or evil, and this changes your powers and the cutscenes. Anyways, there is a story here, it's pretty forgettable, and there's a lot of cutscenes. Who really cares about that stuff? The reason I bring this game up is that it's a game that nobody really talks about these days, and it's a pretty solid first-person shooter. And really, nobody's talking about the local co-op in the PlayStation 2 version. I certainly didn't know it existed back in the day, so maybe you missed this one also. The game's not perfect, but if you like that gothic western horror theme and some decent gameplay, definitely give this one a try. Dark Escape 4D is basically a light gun shooter that only came out in the arcades. And like the name implies, that 4D sensory element really does come into play and really couldn't be recreated at home. So while you're shooting various monsters and zombies and stuff, your seat is also gonna rumble. You're gonna get air blasts into your face, and your heartbeat gets monitored through the gun that you're holding. And the faster it goes, the more the game messes with you. This is honestly just really over the top, but in the best way. You also wear 3D glasses, so when monsters jump at you, it's gonna give you that 3D effect, which is pretty cool. This is one of those games that you're really going to want to try to find in person. Of course, you can play it through emulation on MAME, but there's definitely going to be a lot lost. I didn't know that this game existed until very recently, and I've yet to find it in an arcade. So that's something I'm actively looking for now. But even taking out all the gimmicky sensory stuff, what you have here is a really solid horror-themed light gun shooter that you can play with a friend. But from what I've heard, people say that this is one of the best horror arcade experiences ever made. So anyways, let me know if you ever played this game in person. I want to know what your experience was like. Night of the Sacrifice. This is another game that came out exclusively in Japan, and this time on the Nintendo Wii. Luckily, we got a fan translation. Its original Japanese name was Akini no Yoru, and it's a first-person horror game. You use the Wiimote like a flashlight, but the main gimmick here is that you use the balance board for movement. So while you're standing on it, you move your feet to walk. The controls here are pretty weird. You're basically just looking around with a flashlight and you have to move it over to the side to move the camera. And that's kind of hard to get used to. But overall, it's slow, it's immersive, and it's completely weapon free. You just run, hide, and hope whatever's chasing you doesn't find you. There is a co-op assist mode here, and I've never heard anybody really talk about it. Player 2 uses a second Wii remote, and you kind of just move a cursor. You can't do a whole lot, you mostly just slow down enemies, and you can help with puzzles. So it's more of a support role instead of a full co-op mode. The atmosphere here is great. There's dark corridors, creepy sound design, and it kind of has that classic Fatal Frame style tension. It's simple, but it really works. I wanted to mention it because, first of all, I don't really hear anyone talking about this game to begin with, and then if anyone even does know about this game, they probably don't know about that co-op mode. And to me, any horror game that adds any kind of co-op support is definitely worth trying out at least once. Overall, I definitely do recommend this game. Just think of the co-op mode as kind of a bonus. And if you are able to play it with a balance board, that definitely makes it more of a unique experience as well. Let's talk about Painkiller, Hell, and Damnation. This game came out in 2012 for the PS3, the 360, and on Steam. A company called People Can Fly made the original Painkiller back in 2004. It's a fast-paced first-person shooter. Then in 2012, the Farm 51 brought it back with Painkiller, Hell, and Damnation. This is a game that's clearly influenced by games like Doom and Quake. It has a lot of horror elements, mostly cathedrals, graveyards, and crypts filled with demons and tortured souls. It's more eerie than scary, but the atmosphere definitely leans into dark fantasy horror. But the gameplay itself is all about non-stop action. There's waves of enemies, there's huge bosses, and lots of different guns. You're able to play through the entire story mode in split-screen co-op. This is not the most polished shooter out there, but it's one that I rarely hear people talk about. And the fact that it has full co-op support throughout the campaign, I definitely do recommend it. Contagion. This one's a little bit older. It was released back in 2013 by Monochrome. It's one of those early indie shooters that definitely tried to emulate the success of Left 4 Dead. It's a first-person shooter, and everything about it definitely feels familiar, but it's a little bit slower and darker. But much like Left 4 Dead, this one has split-screen co-op, which in this day and age is pretty rare for a first-person shooter. Also, like Left 4 Dead, there's a lot of zombies in this game. So you basically start off in this apocalyptic-looking city overrun by zombies. Yes, very familiar. One interesting and maybe kind of annoying aspect is if one of you dies, you don't just respawn, you turn into a zombie and you go after your partner. The game's not flashy, and the visuals definitely show their age, but I think that the atmosphere still holds up. And when it comes to horror games, Contagion is not one that I hear mentioned very often. So if you're like me and you did not play this game back in 2013, maybe give it a try. Vaccine Rebirth is a throwback to classic 90s survival horror. It has those tank controls, fixed camera angles, creepy mansions, all of it. But the coolest part is that it has local co-op. You and a friend, you work together to survive the infection, and you fight off mutated monsters and whatever the hell else is around you. It's a little bit janky, but it's fun. And I think if you're used to the games that inspired this, like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, it won't be that hard to get used to it. But if you are not used to the clunky feeling of tank controls, there is an option to play the game in first person, and that definitely makes it a bit easier. The premise is you play as one of two biohazard agents, and you're looking for a vaccine to save your infected partner. The twist is, every time they relapse, the mansion rebuilds itself with new rooms, enemies, and item placements. So it has kind of a roguelite element. So if you grew up on PS1 survival horror games and you want something similar to that, Vaccine Rebirth is definitely worth checking out. I've covered this game a couple times on this channel before, and usually whenever I bring it up, I get a lot of comments of people saying that they never heard about it. I'm going to mention it again because I think it's worth trying out, and there's not very many co-op survival horror games. Space Beast Terror Fright. This one is a roguelite first-person shooter, and you can play it with up to 4 players in local split-screen co-op. The goal is pretty simple. You grab the data cores, you shut down the reactor, and you escape. But if you get hit once, you die, and the monsters just never stop coming. In this game, every decision matters. Sometimes you have to block off a hallway, or maybe you need to leave it open so you can escape. The runs are pretty short here, but they're really difficult. This one also has procedurally generated levels. This is another one that can be a little rough around the edges. In fact, when I went back to play this for this video, I couldn't even get the game booted. For some reason, my mouse was stuck and I couldn't move around to even start the menu. So I don't know what that was about, but I did play this game last Halloween and I did really enjoy it. Okay, this one is a weird one. I don't know if you've heard of it, Bloodborne PSX. So this is a demake of Bloodborne, and it's made to look like it came out on the PlayStation 1. The developer is Lilith Walther, and she did an excellent job of making this feel just like a PlayStation 1 game. It has that really chunky, low polygonal count graphic style. It only has D-pad support, just like an early PS1 game. To move the camera, it's not with the right stick. You actually have to use L and R to rotate left and right. And it's a pretty faithful recreation of the original Bloodborne. Now, that's a game I don't have a ton of experience with, but the friend that I played it with is kind of obsessed with all of the Souls games. And from what he said, he was pretty impressed by how accurate the recreation was, even down to the cutscenes. But gameplay-wise, it is pretty different, specifically the controls. They do a really great job of staying faithful to the feel of a PlayStation 1 game. The combat itself, though, is a lot easier. You can kill these enemies pretty quickly, and you don't have to work as hard to learn the enemies' moves like the original Bloodborne. You can kind of just slash away and kill them. But the best part is you can play through this entire game in split-screen co-op. Unfortunately, the second player can't really go through doors or trigger cutscenes or anything. You have to wait for player one to do all of that stuff. He's still able to use his own equipment and do all of the combat. Anyways, this game is just really impressive, and for being a game that's intentionally a little bit janky and trying to look like a game from the 90s, this is done with a lot of polish. All of the stiff controls, the bad graphics, and the low budget nature of this are all completely intentional. So if you are a fan of Bloodborne or just PS1 games in general, I highly recommend this game. But I do have to mention, Sony found out about this game and tried to get it removed from the internet. But honestly, it's not that hard to find. Actually, you can get it on archive.org, and I'm going to put a link to that in the description because f*** you, Sony. The game is free, so if you have a PC, there's no reason not to try it. Emissary Zero is a brand new horror game that came out this year in 2025, and it's already one of my favorite co-op games of the year. The best part is you can play through the whole game in split-screen co-op. It also has online co-op, and you can do a combination of the two. I played locally with my friend and then had another friend online to play with us, and that was really fun. I don't know how to describe this game. It's just really weird. For some reason, you're astronauts, and you kind of just wander around this huge building. The game was made by a solo developer, and it's honestly way better than you'd expect. The building is really dark, but you can pick up a flashlight. There are definitely some jump scares here. I don't think they're used too much. But this game does a really good job of building tension. You'll be sneaking around in a dark basement and you'll see these weird monsters. You can't fight them. All you can really do is hide from them. But pretty much every time that they kill you, it's completely unexpected. I mean, this is honestly probably one of the scariest games I've ever played. And playing it with friends is just really fun, and we were laughing the entire time. Whenever you see one of your friends die and hearing their reaction, it's pretty hilarious. The game is kind of rough in spots, and the learning curve's a little bit steep, but the atmosphere completely sells it. The tight corridors, great lighting, and eerie sound design, it just makes every encounter hit hard. This game did get a lot of attention on TikTok apparently, and that kind of blew it up. But I didn't know it existed until just a few weeks ago, and I haven't heard anybody talk about the split-screen co-op mode whatsoever. Anyways, I highly recommend Emissary Zero. If you haven't heard of it, definitely give it a try. Not only is it one of my favorite co-op games of the year, it's just one of my favorite horror co-op games I've ever played. So there are 10 local co-op horror games that you probably haven't played. What are some games that I missed? And if you enjoyed this video, you should check out that video that I mentioned where I talked about the first ever co-op survival horror game, Seven Mansions. I went into the history of that game and a little bit of the history of horror games and co-op horror games and the significance of Seven Mansions in that era. I put a lot of work into that video, so I definitely think it's worth checking out. Thanks for watching.